do so. Okay, so we have a relatively small number, which is lovely. And so we thought we might start by just quickly introducing ourselves and saying who we are, where we're from, and what we're hoping to get on the session. I note that some of you have already done this in chat. So I'm Andrew Trelaw, as you can see from the extremely subtle branding on my slide and indeed on my polo top. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the group. Sarah.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Jones. I'm based at Japan in the Netherlands. I'm one of the co-chairs on the group with Andrew. And I'm interested, well, I'm working in the Yusk initiative, so we're kind of bringing that expertise into the group. But what we're mostly interested in is what's happening in the other initiatives internationally and seeing how we can align across the different data commons. So we've done work on definitions of the data commons and a bit on the typology, and that's the kind of work we'd like to consult with you on. So understanding what perspectives you're coming from and what kind of contributions you could give into the group.
Thank you. Francoise.
Yes, my name is Francois Genova. I am Emerita researcher in Strasbourg Observatory in France. I was involved with Sarah in a previous working group of the EOSC, and we had tasks to give to this kind of group in the RDA. So now I am here to see what is happening.
I feel checked up on. Thank you. Ari.
Hi, I'm Arias Mihevc from University of Helsinki. I mostly work with environmental research infrastructures in Europe and also in EOSC. But I'm very interested about what are the developments in this field as well in the global sense.
Okay, thank you. Vanessa?
Morning. So my name is Vanessa Proudman, Director of Spark Europe. I'm also really interested in the updates. I've never managed to come to any of these meetings, but I'm really interested and also looking at maybe how it relates to the UNESCO Open Science recommendation, which is probably going to be ratified this month, and more broadly, whether it covers open access as well as research data. So really interested to be part of this session today. Thanks.
Thanks, Vanessa. Michelle.
Hi, folks. Oh, that's not a very good picture. I'm Michelle Bakker, and I'm the director of the Research Software Alliance. And I'm interested in getting an update on the initiative. Sorry, I'm just going to give up on that. And yeah, particularly to see how software is incorporated in the ongoing discussions. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Muriyama-san.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm now doing the participating in a parallel session in a Japanese conference at the same time, but I'm sorry. That's in a
Oh wow, that's impressive multitasking. Thank you.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's really, you know, that the data platform is one of the very biggest concern of the community. And yeah, I have been working for some intergovernmental framework and some science councils, and I hope that I will, yeah, to find out the so better way to implement or the forming the consensus for me to feedback it to the other communities too. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Dimitri?
Yes, so Dimitri Zabo in Rai, France. I first came to GORC at Helsinki plenary. I don't recall which number it was. And since I've been following a bit lightly, I'm here to catch up. What are the updates?
Okay, thank you. Martina?
Yes, my name is Martina Stockhauser from the German Climate Computing Center. I'm also one of the managers of the IPCC Data Distribution Center, so IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm contributing to the infrastructure development in climate sciences as well. So my interest is to see how our more pragmatic approaches align with these more global directions that you have here. And maybe I should mention that I'm a member of the USC Task Force on Long-Term Data Preservation. So thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Helen.
Hey, good morning, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Helen Greaves. I'm based at the British Geological Survey in the UK. And a bit like Ari, I'm very heavily involved in development and implementation of environmental research infrastructures in Europe. I have an interest in the activities of this group, but I'm also here wearing my TAB hat this morning. I'm interested to see how the group is evolving on two levels. So I think that's probably about me for this morning.
Okay, thank you. So we have both you and Francois keeping an eye on us. Florence. Okay, thank you. Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Callahan. I'm editor-in-chief of Patterns, which is we're still pretty new, and we launched our first issue in April last year. And I'm here to find out what's going on and hopefully talk to people nicely and get them to write me some articles for Patterns. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Christian. Okay, possibly an audio problem there. Ingrid?
Does this work?
Yes.
Yeah, that seemed to work. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ingrid Dillo. I come from the Netherlands, where I work at DANS, a data service provider. I'm also quite involved in all kinds of projects and activities and groups around the European Open Science Cloud. And I just want to give you a little example of why, a reason of why I'm here this morning. In my institute, we are using the Fuji tool for data, the assessment of the fairness of data, and in a small project. And we wanted to compare data sets from different repositories. And we found out this week, after a lot of problems, that it was completely impossible to run the tool and compare the results, because it is impossible to identify the publication date, just because all repositories are using different metadata fields. So, that made me quite sad. So I thought today I'm going to go to the Gore group and start from the meta level and try to get inspired again, because we still have a long way to go, and let's work from both ends.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Zoom has helpfully rearranged everybody, so let me see if I can remember who we haven't heard from yet. Roman?
Yeah, good morning. I'm from the University of Vienna in Germany. I'm the part of the local support team on research data management at the university, but I'm also involved in the, let's say, regional consortia that tries to harmonize between the universities in one of the states. And I'm here to collect basically what's the latest on the global level or on the more broader level. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jagdish, my apologies if I've mangled your name.
Hi, my name is Jagdish Arias. I am a librarian in Nepal. I work in a research organization, Social Science Baha, and I am also the country coordinator for the open access in Nepal for the IFL, an international organization, and I work for the advocacy of open access, open science in Nepal. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Welcome. Leslie Wyborn.
Hi, I'm Leslie Wyborn, and I guess the hat I've got on today is the chair of the Academy of Science Data and Science Committee. I'm more interested in, what's the global picture and how is Australian science fitting, or scientific data fitting into that global picture?
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Nina Weisweiler.
Yeah, hi. I'm Nina. I'm working for the Helmholtz Open Science Office at the Helmholtz Association, but I'm here rather with my head of the Re3 Data COREF project, which is working on further developing the registry of research data repositories, so a big infrastructure to register repositories. And I'm actually pretty new to that group and to the concept, so I thought it was like it sounded like a great idea, and I just wanted to get a little idea of what the discussions are and how we maybe could contribute to it, or how this will develop.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
Everyone, I'm Tom Honeyman. I'm the software program manager at the Australian Research Data Commons, which is a program of work to work towards recognition of research software as a first-class output of research. I've come along basically to be a bit of a fly on the wall, I think.
It's a very Australian thing, a fly on the wall. Christoph.
Good morning. I'm also working with the Helmholtz Open Science Office. My colleague Nina already introduced herself. We at the Open Science Office work a lot to understand the global developments concerning the building of an global research data infrastructure, because we give input to the policy making within Helmholtz. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Christopher?
Good morning, and apologies for joining slightly late, but walking the dogs and eating my porridge took priority this morning. So, hello to some of the people I've known from before in other groups. I'm here because I've managed to miss a lot of these meetings in other plenaries, and I've just started the National PID Strategies Working Group as co-chair with Natasha Simons from ARDC. In the case they put about coordinating with some other groups, that included Global Open Research Commons. So I'm here to find more about this group and how we can sort of coordinate with the working group that I've set up, or we've set up.
Okay, thank you. Vaso, I note, is having network problems, so maybe Paula. Oh no, Vaso, you've unmuted. Do you want to say something?
I could probably do it without the video. Apologies for that. I'm a newbie in this group. Actually, I recently moved from Limber to Duns, so I'm in the process of expanding a little bit my perspective, and I've been involved in several projects and initiatives related to open science, and always we step on problems with coordination. So having read your previous notes from your previous sessions, I was really interested in this session as the several platforms get a different level of maturity. So basically, this is why I'm here today. One of the reasons.
Okay, great, thank you. And lastly, Paula.
Hi everyone, my name is Paula Martinez. I work for the Australian Research Data Commons, also for the Research Software Alliance. My interest with this group is because I'm chairing the FAIR for Research Software Working Group, and we are all advocates for open research software and research in general. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you for indulging me in that set of introductions. I think it was very interesting to get a sense of the diversity of people who are here, the range of organizations you're from, which is wonderful, but also the range of reasons why you might be interested in this group. So let me just give a little bit of brief context, and then Sarah will discuss some of the progress we've made to date. And then we have some questions that we'd like you to reflect on. We, as a group, have been going for a number of plenaries now. There was an initial interest group meeting at plenary 14 in Helsinki, which was the last physical plenary we were able to have before the world changed. And since then, we've kind of continued to work between the plenaries and at the virtual plenaries that we've been having. And we've been working in a field that continues to change. So as I think a number of you have already said, there are an increasing number of relevant activities around the world that we need to be aware of and think about how we might try and interact with. So when we first started, we had EOSC and the Australian Research Data Commons, and then things like the African Open Science Platform came along. There's an entire set of activities called the Globe and Open Science Cloud that we'll talk a little bit about later on, and other analogous activities starting up in different countries. So we've been trying to respond to a situation that has continued to change and evolve, which brings its own challenges. So what I think we might do is we have a couple of people who are scheduled to present who aren't here. So Sarah and I will have to be a little bit flexible with the agenda. So if any of you have turned up thinking that the agenda, as stated in the session description, will run like clockwork, I'm afraid I have to disabuse you of that now. The agenda will be adjacent to what was written, but hopefully we'll still cover topics that are of interest to you, but we may have to skate quickly over some of the things that we'd hoped to cover. But maybe, Sarah, if I can stop talking and pass over to you now, please.
Yeah, of course. So I'll just share my screen and bring up some slides on the typology work that we've done. So as Andrew mentioned, sorry, let me get this into slideshow mode. Hopefully you see that now. So We've been doing various work in the group. We started off with some definitions of the commons, and we've discussed that in previous sessions. So what we're going to pick up on today is the work we've done around the typology to try and understand the elements that are really covered in different research data commons and trying to align on a common definition of those and understanding how we can then connect between the different commons initiatives. So the work we did on this started off by looking at the different building blocks in different examples. So we pulled together different diagrams from examples like the NIH Data Commons, from EOSC, the World Data Service, and the Canadian Alliance, as it's now called, what was previously the New Digital Research Organization. And as I said, we're trying to use that to try and pick out the common elements so that we could have this kind of shared definition and then look at ways that we're connecting across the different spaces. So I'll talk through some of the inputs and give you some reflections on, how we discuss those and then the common elements we've come up with. And this is still very much a work in progress. So we've got some questions at the end to try and start a discussion with you about which elements are at the fore and how we visualize and represent those. Here we go. I'm not used to doing this just on a laptop. I'm normally at home with the two screens, so apologies for the kind of slow moving of slides. So the first one that we looked at was the NIH Data Commons stack. And we found this kind of layered model very useful, and it's something we've seen come out of other examples as well. So there they have the kind of compute platform at the bottom, the cloud, or the HPC as the kind of underlying infrastructure that makes the other aspects possible. And then the data lying on top of that compute, and above that, a whole kind of software stack. And I know a number of you are coming from different software groups and are interested in the inputs here. So here they've got different app stores, all of the different scientific workflows, different API connections and tools to make the analysis possible. And as a kind of cross-cutting theme, they've got the digital object compliance. And we've been thinking about those cross-cutting elements as well when we've been developing our kind of typology. We also looked at Yusk, which again has a similar kind of layered model. We've got the EOS core, which interestingly, we don't really class compute in the core there. We've got cross-cutting services like AAI in the core and persistent identifiers, and then federating the data from the different repositories together. But we do have this same notion of this exchange layer, which is kind of a rich set of services and tools to enable researchers to work on that data. There was also a series of action lines that the EC had pulled together when they had their staff working document to define the roadmap towards EOSC. And some of these we haven't really picked up on because they're very kind of general activity areas rather than necessarily the building blocks. So defining the architecture and how we federate the services, making sure we have the different standards for the data. The ones we kind of picked up on mainly in terms of our typology were the rules and the governance, because we found that when we're just looking at the kind of layer stack and the kind of technical view on the commons and how it operates, we're missing a lot of the things around how we're actually governing that space, how we're ensuring that we make those different services sustainable and the different stakeholders we're needing to connect with. And then the rules of participation that have been developed within EOSC are something that's come out quite a lot in our discussions as well. And this is one of the core elements that we think needs to be in place, that you have a set of rules about how people engage and participate in the commons and what the different roles and responsibilities of them are. So that's something that you'll see come out in our kind of final discussions. We also looked at the WDS web stack view, and this is looking at a much more granular level. So from the hardware to the operating system and the database, and then all of the different kind of server software and interfaces. And this, in terms of our discussion, was a little bit too granular. We want to look at things in a very kind of cross-cutting way, things that are applicable across all at a higher level. So we haven't really taken much from the layer model here. But the elements that they've brought out, the kind of cross-cutting things around standards and governance and the interaction with different stakeholders, we found very useful. And when I come to the kind of proposal we have, you'll see we've got this kind of layer model and these overarching or cross-cutting elements. And then the one that's maybe closest to the kind of definition that we'll bring up is the example from the Canadian Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, the Alliance as it's called now. And they have this underlying kind of storage, compute and network services, and then are federating all of the different repository systems within Canada. And they're highlighting these aspects of interoperability across those and layering the different services, the different data platforms and interfaces and research tools over that. So this kind of fits with that kind of layered view that we've also taken. And again, they've got cross-cutting elements of FAIR and the different international standards kind of feeding in at the sides. And I think that's the kind of view that we're going for too. So these are the elements that we've kind of pulled together. We've discussed this a little bit at a previous plenary, but it would be good to have discussion with you all about this today. So we've got the kind of technical layer stack here, where we've got the base level infrastructure, and we've put storage, compute and network here, but there may be other things we're kind of overlooking. So thinking about the EOSC model, we're definitely emphasizing AAI here. So that's maybe something we need to include. And then we've got the kind of federation of the data over that basic layer. And at the top here, we've just put software, but maybe we need to be picking up on the different platforms and tools and different services. So I know the kind of service dimension again comes out very strongly in the EOSC work. So maybe we're needing to expand our definition here. And then we have quite a lot of supporting elements, and I think these cover very different angles as well. So we've got the governance and the rules of participation, which are really the way that we're controlling or steering the commons. But then we've also got these elements around making sure we've got appropriate skills, so people know how to use the commons, they have appropriate support in place, that we're engaging with the different stakeholders. And also, I kind of see the standards and interoperability a little bit different. I think it's something that needs to bleed through the model. It's not really like on the side or kind of overarching. It's something that's fundamental to connect between these different layers. So our next steps here are really trying to flesh out this model more, crowdsourcing definitions of the different components, understanding how they're being implemented in different spaces. And you'll hear when we talk about the associated working group, which held a session last night, they're using this typology as a way to tag the activities happening in different commonses. So I think that will help us with definitions, but we maybe also want to look at things like CASRAI as a starting point, or you might know about other kind of catalogs and things that we should look at to define what's happening in each of these blocks. And we're also looking to visualize this in a much better way. This is a very simple kind of listing of the different elements. We haven't really drawn it out into a diagram in the way that we have, for example, for the Canadian example that I just showed. So these are some questions we put forward for the discussion. We want to understand whether this notion that we have of the kind of core technical layers and the supporting elements, is that something that aligns with your thinking or the way that you're developing the infrastructure, either at your institutional level or in the different research domains or in commons initiatives if you're working in the likes of EOSC or ARDC or the African Open Science Platform. To pick up on, your views about those overarching aspects about the governance or rules, what is it that we really need in place there? How much alignment is there in the different approaches that we're taking? And also then, what are those cross-cutting elements that kind of bleed through? So like the standards and interoperability, things that are more integral to the whole operation of the commons. And then the final point here, as I mentioned, we have this associated working group, the International Models Working Group, and they're suggesting, we'd like to see if you've got suggestions of resources to try and help define these elements so that we can assist in the work that that group's doing as well. So those are the kind of questions we have for discussion. I can leave that slide up, but I can't see the people to try and help facilitate the discussion if I do that. So let me try and open that up again.
So Sarah, someone's captured that slide in the collaborative notes.
Oh,
so
okay. Okay, so I can stop the
I think
sharing,
you can stop that,
perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, excellent. So that was a very quick kind of starter for 10 to show you what we've been doing around the typology, but it'd be good to get reflections from you to see how that aligns with your thinking or whether there are things you think we've missed. I see a hand raised by Francois.
Yes, it's just that it's a definition of a core element in a sense.
Yeah.
I am always thinking about my hometown, which is IVOA, and which is an organization which mission is to build standards, basically. So for us, the very core of the organization is standards.
Yeah.
And you can include standards in the infrastructure, depending on how you define the infrastructure. So I think I can manage, because I will have to provide something along these lines, a description of IVOA along these lines in the working group very soon. So I think I can manage, but I will push infrastructures a bit far, maybe from what you have thought, and put the standards in the infrastructure.
Yeah, so closer alignment of the standards. Yeah. Andrew, you've raised a hand too.
Yeah, so I guess I would note that, so one of the challenges we're facing with the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group is that the different commons that we are trying to map across are quite different kinds of things. So in the working group that Francoise and I were both in last night, for me, I'm not sure when it was for her, there was some discussion about whether the commons provided the resources or not. And so IVOA is a commons based on standards development, as Francois just says, but the resources are not provided by the IVOA. They're provided by organizations that adopt IVOA standards. Whereas my organization doesn't do a lot of standards development, but does provide a lot of resources. So you have the challenge of coming up with a diagram or a way of describing commons that fit very different kinds of organizations. And that's why that architecture stack on the right-hand side is so incredibly generic, because we were trying to sort of abstract it up to something that you could lay across almost everything and still have it more or less work.
Martina?
Yes, thank you. If I recall our discussion in climate sciences, we are discussing a lot around connecting elements, not so much around the elements, but how to connect it. So it's all about provenance, about controlled vocabularies and interlinking, because our data is used in different portals. So the second point is that discussions have started to get some credit for long-term preservation as well as infrastructure maintenance, because that's hidden underneath these new portals which are based on data which is stored elsewhere. So these are the two elements which we are discussing at the moment. So not so sure if the second one is aligned with commons, but the first one is the question, how is this interlinking reflected in the commons?
Yeah. Again, there's very different types of organizations and ways that they're operating. And as you said, within EOSC, it's very much a federation. The data's not stored in EOSC per se, it's in all of these different services and repositories. So it's an interlinking of that.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that linking idea, one of the things I think ideally we'd like to be able to do is recognize that the different commons around the world need to be themselves connected. Researchers sitting in one area, Australia or Europe, will want to access resources from another and be able to discover across another. So we need to recognize the challenges. I note a question from Vanessa. Do we have a definition of the commons?
Yeah, we do. I can dig that out as we talk from our previous groups.
Digital resources for the common good, is that what we landed on?
Yeah, that was the kind of strap line, but there was a longer definition, only a sentence or so. But I'll pick that out as we speak and I'll drop that into the chat.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So any other thoughts from people on this notion of core and supporting elements?
I'll have a go, if that's okay.
Tom, yeah.
I'm wondering about refactoring around the core elements, and based on what you were saying about the differences between the different instantiations around the world, thinking instead of infrastructure as being the core element, but then talking about different classes of infrastructure as being things that could combine in different combinations to form different kinds of science clouds. And those infrastructure, and it would necessarily mean splitting apart some of the labels that you've got there. So there's what you're calling infrastructure there mostly relates to the hardware, but then there would be infrastructure like asset classes, like data, but also software as a form of asset class. And I would bring the human capacity inside as a form of infrastructure as well. And then what's missing then is also the informatics infrastructure, the identifier services and registries and so on. And I think that that further allows you to split apart. You know, you were talking about when the data is not held directly within the commons, but is instead referred to through that. So each commons would be a combination of a different set of combinations of those types of infrastructure together.
That's actually, okay, that's an interesting idea, Tom. When I get to the quick report back from the working group that sits under this, hopefully you'll see some resonances between what that working group is doing and some of the ideas you've just raised. Vanessa.
Yeah, hi. So I'd like to talk about a few things that have come up over the last year or two. We're working on how to sustain some of the infrastructures in Europe, some of the smaller infrastructures, so for open access, but also for open science. And we also surveyed a number of them for our SCOS strategy, scos.org, where we're trying to crowdfund to sustain some of these services. And a number of the services, they were saying how important good governance is and that they need capacity to build on that. And I really think that if we're thinking about resources for the commons, some of the most important elements are thinking about good governance, where the community is represented, has a say, and also how is that going to be sustained, those resources. So somebody just mentioned, you know, that we need data from different places, but if we're dependent on different data sources, different services, how do we know that they're going to remain part of the commons? So, and in addition, Sarah talking to the rules of participation of EOSC, which I think are also really important. So what are the roles and responsibilities of elements of the commons so that the commons work? So I think those are kind of maybe softer issues, but I think they're just so important. So the technical, yes, but the governance, sustainability, and the rules of participation are, I think, are absolutely key. The glue to a sustainable and healthy commons going forward. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think you're right in terms of that governance and having kind of community governance, making sure all of those different stakeholders are represented. That's something we've definitely been trying to do in the EOS context, looking at, you know, the different member states, making sure they're all represented in the steering board, but also that we have a very kind of wide stakeholder forum so that we're getting, you know, the research community inputs through the different infrastructures or representative bodies, as well as, you know, the different members of the association. That's one of the benefits of having set up the legal entity, that we've got now all different types of research performing and funding organizations together in one forum there. But yeah, the making sure that, you know, that I think there are core things that we need to make sure are sustainably funded so that Commons continues to operate well, and that we interact well with the different providers of the data. So yeah, I think these human kind of elements are really critical. Michelle, you've raised a hand, and then Ari.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you for having done this analysis so far. It's already incredibly invaluable to have identified these commonalities and differences. And I wanted to highlight that it's only going to overlap with the work of the Global Open Science Clouds initiative. And I'm sorry, I'm mobile, so I'm not really sure if you're going to cover this in the agenda later, but that the GOSC initiative has 4 working groups, and one of them is on governance and sustainability, and we're looking at sharing experiences and good practice. So the fact that you've already identified that is an area of this similarity is really fascinating. And there's other working groups on policy and legal, which Sarah and I are both involved in, technical infrastructure and data interoperability, just for everyone's information.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Michelle.
Yep, thanks, Michelle. And sorry, just before we go to Ari, we were hoping that Mark Leggett would be able to join us to talk about, well, Mark and Simon Hodson, to talk a little bit more about the Global Open Science Cloud. I suspect they're probably not going to be joining us now, and so I was just going to do a screen share of a single web page as background if we get to it. If not, right, yes, thank you. That was actually probably the page I was going to show people. So we may or may not get to GOSC depending on how we go with the rest of the discussions. But if not, Michelle's placed a link in chat. We'll make sure we capture chat and put it in the collaborative notes. Sorry, Ari, go for it.
No problem. Actually, I think Michelle also already mentioned what I was mostly planning to say. And also I'd like to thank Vanessa for bringing up the fact that there's a lot of really like policy decisions which you need to which organizations need to make to be part of this kind of commons. And I think that, I mean, Yusk already has, of course, a lot of these in their rules of participation, but analyzing them makes them quite similar to a lot of other kind of general policy decisions, and making a really kind of, let's say, I'm not sure that we want to go in the route of certifications here, but in sense that could be one way of guaranteeing some level of sustainability and interoperability and long intent, at least, of being a long time involved in this approach. Because if you don't have, as Vanessa mentioned, you can't really build any services on top of other services if you don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's very important for those kind of core underlying elements. But in terms of the data as well, we need to know it's in repositories that are going to be long-lived and that we're going to have continued access to that data. I know there's been a lot of work, well, Ingrid's involved in the long-term preservation task force that's been set up by the association now, because I think that idea of trusted repositories and making sure that they're reliable long-term and preserving the content hasn't been picked up as much in EOSC. So I think that's something that we want to prioritize in forthcoming programs.
I think actually just to comment on that one, I think that the World Data System is very much active on that side, if I understand right.
Yeah, I think through Quartus Seal and others as well. Yasuhiro, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm a little bit interested in how we define the supporting elements, the core elements of one of your diagrams. Yeah, what I mean is, what I would like to say is that for instance, governance and sustainability, interoperability, human capacity, and all are important. And at the same time, for instance, governance and how the system can be sustainable, or the including organization and the technical infrastructure and the interoperability, all can affect the basic design concept of the software or infrastructure itself. So for me, which can be supporting staff, which can be core staff, it looks like standing at the same time, it's at the same level, and in a sense, the supporting elements drawn here could provide the basic design direction or strategy. Then it can be give them some basis for technical or software or other data management strategy. So I'm not sure how do you discuss about that kind of definition. It might be troublesome. It's my feeling. Thank you.
So just to make sure that I've understood that correctly, Yasuhiro, you're saying that the supporting elements are they're not supporting the technology, it's making the supporting element decisions drive the shape of the technology. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, you were right. That's supporting element. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes WDS and CoData or other international organizations which are not really technical give that kind of principles and which can be a basis for the future designs and the future commons, future infrastructure. Then it's my sense. Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Michelle, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it would be also interesting to connect the elements you've identified with some of the conversations about the workforce capability that we need to support these kind of initiatives. So there's lots of discussion happening about how we provide the digital skills for open science, research software engineers, data stewardship, how we support all those kind of technical elements. And we see some conversations emerging on how we support some of the other things like engagement through community managers. But I think it's useful to have this diagram to get us to also think about how do we ensure that we have skills in the mix and people upskilled to think about the governance issues, or how do we recognize the people that are doing the standards and interoperability work. So not only in terms of how do we provide the skilled workforce to support all of this, but how do we give recognition and career paths for them.
Yeah, that's definitely still a big gap in the European context. That, often people aren't getting the recognition for these skills, which is then difficult to sustain it and have established curricula that are applied across the board. I thought I saw a hand from Paula, but maybe that point was raised by Michelle.
Yeah, I also saw a hand from Paula, but that's okay. Okay, that was question 1 of 4. Oh, this is great.
And
This
lots of useful input. So thank you very much, everybody.
There's some great stuff there. If we don't get to any of the rest of the agenda from my point of view, that's fine.
So we have picked up a couple of points around the governance and the rules that need to be in place. So I think this is maybe where Paula had raised the question, in her thinking the rules are part of the governance. And I think you're right. I think there's different layers of the governance. There's a kind of strategic discussion at a high level, which is maybe why we've separated the governance out from the rules, because that's much more a practical implementation on, how people actually engage in the commons and what we're expecting of different users or service providers when they're using these different platforms. So that's really the reason they've been separated out. But there is definitely a close alignment between the governance and the rules. Does anyone want to reflect on the kind of governance structures they have for the different commonses or ways in which you're approaching that?
Sorry if I look distracted. I'm responding to a question from Dimitri in the chat.
No worries. Yeah, there will be a repeat session. I think it's late night tomorrow night, from recollection.
No, it's Thursday the 11th.
Ah, it's next week. Okay.
And it's at... okay, sorry, it's Thursday for me. It's Wednesday for UTC. So it's Wednesday the 10th. At 2300 UTC.
Yeah, late night European.
Yeah, late night European.
So a good one for Australian and US time zones.
That's
Michelle, you've raised a hand.
Yeah, on the governance issue, I was thinking it would be interesting to see how many of them embrace the principles of open governance. So there's been some work done identifying, how open infrastructures should function so that the way in which they function is open in addition to all their resources. I suspect there's work to be done there, and if that could be factored into the analysis, it would be quite interesting.
Yeah. Did you want to respond on that, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. So the example, thinking about this discussion about the rules of participation, which is the way the EOSC describes it, and the governance structures. For me, at least, they're related, but they're distinct, or at least they're distinguishable. And an example that I use a lot when I think about this is the link that I've just placed in chat. So this is a thing that's been developed in Australia with some input from my organisation called the Agricultural Research Federation. So it's an agricultural commons, if I can put it like that. And they put a lot of thought into how to construct a governance that would enable the providers of data into the commons and the consumers of data into the commons to have their rights and responsibilities carefully articulated and identified, so that it was really, really clear for anybody joining this federation, what the expectations were and what they could rely on from other people. It's quite nicely nuanced. It's based on some work done by our Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, and the person who has done a lot of the development of this thinking is a guy called Paul Box. And I'm sure he'd be happy to talk more about it. But they put, I think, probably more thought into the governance structures than into the technology. And to go back to Yasuhiro's point, I think they did a lot of the governance work before they built the technology. So the technology was in support of the governance structures rather than driving the governance structures.
Yeah, it sounds a very sensible way around to do it. Yasuhiro, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, that's yeah. The agriculture topic reminded me of in RDA we don't necessarily focus on the academic data infrastructure. It could extend the coverage to the industrial data platforms too. Do you have the kind of the views in this diagram? Probably commonly people tends to think about the publicly funded the academic research institutions, I suppose.
Andrew? Oh, you're muted.
I'm trying to switch between talking and typing, which is awkward. So on the industrial piece, the thing that I'm aware of it, I don't know a lot about it, is another European thing, different to EOSC, but interoperating with EOSC in ways that are murky and unclear to me, but that has very much got an industry focus, but is also, again, in ways that it's not clear to me, connected to the Gaia X initiative. I mean, Sarah, you live in Europe, I don't. Can you perhaps articulate your understanding of the relationship between EOSC and the international data spaces?
Do you mean the data spaces that the Commission's pursuing? So the different domain, like the thematic data spaces, like the agriculture or the health data spaces, or between EOSC and Gaia X, or?
Yeah, those ones.
So, I mean, the Commission has this notion of an overall data lake, and EOSC is a kind of horizontal within that, and then there are different kind of thematic data spaces. So EOSC should be cross-cutting with these and helping to connect and serve the different disciplinary data spaces. Gaia X is a completely separate kind of initiative, as you said, much more around industrial partners and data, led initially by France and German governments. And there have been discussions between EOSC and Gaia X about potential connections, but they're very much at the kind of strategic level, not really at the implementation side. What I think is interesting around Gaia X is that recently I'm trying to think what they're calling it, the FAIR data space maybe. GaiaX is connecting up with NFDI, which is the national research infrastructure that's been supported by the main DFG, the main German funder. So I think that will bring GaiaX into a more, I guess, an easier relationship with EOSC, because NFDI is very much like the EOSC within Germany. Because it's looking at the research data, it's looking at the main research institutions and different disciplinary communities. So I think that collaboration between GaiaX and NFDI and the way that they're trying to co-build the infrastructure will make it a much closer parallel with EOS.
Yeah,
So
all right,
I think
thank you.
that
And
will help going forward.
yeah, and NFDI is another one of these things that's come along since this particular interest group started. We should actually think quite a bit more seriously about how we think about interacting with NFDI. And I note that someone who actually lives in Germany has put their hand up.
Yeah, who can probably give a much better perspective.
Who can probably
than
give
I
a much better.
can.
But let me give my one sentence summary from the outside of why I see NFDI as an interesting model.
Yeah,
it's a series of consortia that are providing discipline data infrastructure approaches, which then, in theory, come together into something that's more coherent and national. So instead of defining it as a top-down national thing, it's a series of kind of bottom-up consortia that where the whole is hopefully going to be greater than the sum of the parts. It's a really interesting model, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how it works out. But let's hear from somebody who actually lives in Germany.
Yeah, just one reflection quickly. First, I think one of the things that's been very strong about NFDI is the way that they set up the governance first, that they really planned the program before starting to fund the infrastructure in these different disciplines. And given the discussion we've had about the importance of the governance and steering those technological choices, I think that's been a good approach to follow. Christoph, do you want to come in on NFDI? And
yes,
GaiaX?
I'd like to take the chance. Well, first of all, I have to say I'm not authorized to talk about the NFDI. So what I say is my personal view on that. So I think the special thing about NFDI is that it's actually a funding model. And the funding model is based, I think, on the notion that you can't give too much money to the infrastructure people because they will do all kinds of crazy things with them. So you have to control them by channeling the money via the researchers. So the researchers make sure that the money is spent for the right stuff. So that's the logic, I think, of NFDI, because the money is channeled to research consortia, and they formulate what they need, and then we possibly get some infrastructure. So the actual funding on the face of it is not on the research infrastructure, but on research areas, and they have to come up with ideas or formulate their needs in respect to data, and then further money gets spent. And also the commons, in the sense of making data permanently available for whatever audience, is not so deeply rooted in the system. And it's also not at all rooted in GaiaX. So that's a big difference between GaiaX and and possibly EOSC. GaiaX is very much a project that is supposed to help Europe to become more competitive on a global level in respect to the big players, to the big economic players in the data world. And if you talk to the people within GaiaX who have a say in GaiaX, I think they see themselves very much as a standard provider. And then they come up with certain standards, and then people who want to cooperate have to adhere to these standards, and then they say they have some forms of cooperation. And at the same time, while they're building that, they point to industry cooperations that already exist, where companies of a certain branch of a certain area of activity cooperate in exchanging data, and they do that very much from the point of view that that fits their business model. So that's a completely different logic. So there is some overlap, but I also think there's a lot of difference, and I would not characterize, to come back to the title also of this session, I would not characterize NFDI as an approach for data commons. It's commons in the sense of making a resource available for mankind. It's much more, the logic of NFDI is much more making data available for a certain research area. One could say there is an overlap, but I think from the governance point of view, it's actually quite different. And also, you will not find, at least I don't know anything about ownership within NFDI.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Christophe. Francoise, do you want to come in?
Yes, I would like to comment on something I wrote in the chat. I think that I understand very well that when you distribute many millions of euros, you need to establish rules and governance first. But in other cases, you can have a more agile method to establish an organization. And I agree that it's difficult to change governance when it has begun. But I think that we have to leave some possibility to have established some of these comments with a more agile method. So it's one of the things that is interesting to capture with the examples, certainly. How they were established. So you have to add that yesterday there was something about questions, and Andrew was there too. So you change your hat and you add this to the question list, please. How were you established? What did you discuss governance for 10 years before you began, or did you say it's very urgent, we begin, we have a rough governance and then we do something better? So I really think it's an interesting fact because it tells something about the organization and why it is here.
Yeah, it's a good point. We should add it to the list.
So shall we move down to some of the other questions, the kind of cross-cutting elements that bleed through the comments, are the likes of the standards and the interoperability, or if you are aware of other resources that could help us define these different building blocks to help with the International Models Working Group, and that will maybe kind of segue us to giving a little bit of an explanation of that before we close. Francoise?
Just to say that I fully agree that standards and interoperability are some of the core elements. I think I probably already said that. Because for the IVOA, interoperability is the core mission. So for us, standards and interoperability are the same thing somehow. And I agree that it's absolutely at the core of the system.
Yeah. And when we've looked at those different diagrams, it's really the key element that's kind of cutting through from the kind of, well, I mean, it's the enabler. You know, it's not really a supporting element, it's what's making the whole commons function. Other reflections on this? Or any suggestions on resources that we should be looking at as we try and define these different building blocks or elements of the commons? Maybe ways you've described them in your own initiatives?
I'm just wondering, would we want to have a conversation about prioritizing some of those? Which are the most important elements? Because they're all relevant, but which ones which ones are essential for those building blocks, or do we need to think about first to have something for the common good? Maybe that, I don't know whether you already discussed that. Would we want to discuss that, and then we could go in and find some examples around those areas? Just a thought, really.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's come out in the models working group. Has that been part of the discussion, Andrew? No, they've just been looking at all the elements
the question
together.
of which ones are most important. I think at the moment we are taking the somewhat intellectually lazy position of, like Christoph, let me say, I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the Global Open Research Commons Models group. I'm not one of the co-chairs. So these are also my personal views. It's been kind of assuming everything's roughly equal at the moment, but I agree with Vanessa that there are some things that one might regard as essential and some that one might regard as optional or desirable. However, I'm not sure you'd necessarily get agreement from everybody as to which are the essential elements and which are the optional ones.
Yeah, although I think, Francois has put in chat suggesting that we examine from the examples, and I think as we're going through the examples and doing that kind of mapping with the typology, we'll see which ones come out most regularly, and that will help. Francois, did you want to expand on that?
Yes, just to insist on that, I think that it's another of the questions, but it was more or less underlying the discussion yesterday. What are the core elements? What are the priorities? The core elements also. I agree. Core elements can be different from priorities in a sense, because it depends. It depends on each case. So it's for Andrew. It's another of the questions. What are the core elements in your system? And the second question is, what are the priorities? But there are priorities which can shift from a development phase to an operational phase also. So there is something which is a bit of, it depends really where the commons is in its lifetime about priorities in particular. So I understand the question was, what is a priority? Because it's constitutive of all these things. But I think it's a good question to separate what are the core elements, what are the priorities, and why is that, how this is linked to the phase in your life, life where you are in the life cycle of an organization.
So I want to say something about that, but Vanessa got her hand up first. So Vanessa, and then maybe if I could say something.
Yeah, so just briefly linking to what Francois said about where you are in the life cycle of your service or infrastructure. So I think it also depends if you're a project or if you are a startup or if you're somewhere in between or if you're a fully fledged service or infrastructure and what that legal status is. So that also influences if you're a for-profit or if you are a legal not-for-profit, there are certain things you can't do. So I think that's also an interesting question to analyze when we're looking at those examples, looking at what the legal status is or where that service is in the life cycle on the road to sustainability. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to mute while I was typing. My apologies to those who had to listen to me typing. Yeah, so just going back to the life cycle, I hadn't actually thought that one through, but you're absolutely right that at the early stages of putting a commons together, you might decide, well, to go back 20 minutes in the conversation, you might decide to prioritize governance, or you might decide to prioritize pulling together a core set of data resources that people would want to come and use, or you might prioritize getting the technical architecture right before you start connecting pieces together. So those are all different priority decisions that you might make early on that you might then revisit as the organization grows and matures. So I think that's a really useful insight. And as Francois says, one more dimension for the model group to focus on.
Ari, do you want to come in, and then Michelle?
Yeah, I was just actually thinking from some of the discussions what we had in our own community regarding kind of our own commons there, is that how could we then also find, I mean, when thinking of prioritization, one have to think about what is the benefit of the thing for the organizations to be part of. And I think that this kind of analysis of what is the
I think we've lost Ari there, or unless it's just me and my Wi-Fi being slow. No, it's Andrew's lost him too. Okay, so I was picking up on the benefits. Maybe Michelle, if you want to come in, and hopefully Ari's connection will pick it back up in the meantime.
Yeah, I was going to reflect a bit on Vanessa's point that organizations at different life cycles might, commons at different life cycles might have different features. And this really made me think, in fact, about Ari's work on RI-scapes to identify the different types of RIs, whether it's by life cycle or discipline or geographic area, and how that context affects some of the ways in which they developed, and to hypothesize that perhaps as your work advances and you get beyond the initial analysis of the models, you might start to identify some of these patterns or start to break down by life cycle or discipline or some other area. There's an aspirational goal for when you've got so much detail that you're going into the next level of classification.
That is actually a beautiful segue into the model group, Sarah. If you want to just indulge me there. So I'm not, well, I'm a co-chair for this, but I didn't present this set of slides yesterday. So let me just spend 5 minutes giving you a sense of what's happening in the working group that's associated with this interest group. Let me. Okay, do you see the slides?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So at this plenary, well, I should probably, that's massively unhelpful. So this is a working group within the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group. A number of co-chairs, some of them names you will recognise. There was a session yesterday, at least yesterday in my time zone. There's a repeat today, and there's another repeat on Tuesday. I believe those times are all UTC. At least I hope they're all UTC. But they should now appear in the conference program. So if you missed one of those sessions and you would like to attend, there are 2 more opportunities for you to attend. The model group is essentially taking this high-level description that we've been talking about and drilling a lot deeper and starting to say, okay, so what can we say about these different commons? And you'll see item 3A on this slide. Francoise has already referred to that. She's been asked to describe the IVOA according to a range of different dimensions that I'll talk to in a minute. So this set of ways of describing the commons that I'm about to talk about are being used in 2 ways. One is they're being used to capture information about publications and reports that are in a Zotero bibliography, and the other is they're being used as a way of, if you like, running a ruler over the commons and enabling you to do quite fine-grained descriptions. And the 4 categories that are being used are first of all, what's the discipline domain you're working in? And there they're using the Frascati manual developed by the OECD. I believe this gets used a lot in Europe. I was unaware of it in an Australian context. We have our own thing, but it's a way of describing domains and subdomains. So that's one dimension for commons. We serve the needs of this discipline group. Another dimension is what's the region that your commons serves? Is it Australia? Is it Europe? Is it Canada? The third one is the one we spent a lot of time today talking about, which is this very high level typology. And then the fourth one is, okay, you are providing a commons for this domain in this region. What are the services and resources that you provide? And here we're using the service resource description templates that have been developed for Yusk, that are very, very kind of finely grained and nuanced. And to give you a sense of what these look like, so the top level domain classifications might be quite high level. It's one of these very high level domains. The country codes might be, well, it's Europe, but it's Southern Europe, or it's Central Asia. I think you can go down within each of those, so you can get quite granular for the geographical regions. And let me see if I can find a good example. Yeah, and then the provider and resource profiles within E-Infra Central are quite fine-grained, and there's a lot more detail under each of these. So the idea here is that people will be able to describe different aspects of their commons using a common, if you'll pardon the phrase, set of terms, so that we have a way of doing comparison between different sets of commons infrastructures. That's a very, very high level overview of something that took an hour and a half earlier on today. But if that's the kind of thing that interests you, I'd encourage you to go to one of the working group sessions, the 2 working group sessions that are still coming up.
Any questions or reflections on that approach?
Apologies again for going through it so quickly.
No, that's fine. It's good to be able to share the information on the parallel group.
So given that we've almost run out of time, Sarah, should we talk about next steps? Or, I mean, there are chunks of the agenda that we haven't got to yet, but that's because the preceding conversation was really very, very good.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think it's given us a lot of food for thought of how we continue building on typology and other questions we need to be asking. And I think in terms of our alignment as well with the working group, because they're one of the key kind of implementations of that typology. So as we do the different descriptions in the model working group, that will help us understand, which of these elements are kind of coming up more regularly in different initiatives or being focused on first as the priorities, and how they're developing.
Yeah, indeed. So we'll try and work out how to bring some of that thinking, or make some of that thinking available to the group, noting that the next plenary we'll be having will be as part of International Data Week in June of next year, I think. Who knows, we may even be able to attend some of it in person, which just seems like an unimaginable luxury at this point. But we would like to, I think, try and share some of this information with you before then. So if you're not a member of the interest group, I'd encourage you to sign up on the IDA website so you can get the emails we send. We'll capture the chat from this session and add it to the end of the collaborative notes document. For those of you that joined late, the collaborative notes document, one more time, is here. So yes, so we'll capture the chat there, and I and my co-chairs will spend some time at our next meeting, I think in a couple of weeks' time, working out what to do with the embarrassment of riches we have in front of us.
Yeah, and I think we've picked up most of those comments in the general notes, but by all means extend those notes if there's things we didn't reflect properly from your discussion as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think just a huge thanks to all of you. We were only a small group, but we had a good discussion there and a lot of useful reflections on the work we've done around the typology. So thank you very much for the contributions.
Indeed. Thank you all, and I'm sure we'll
Bye.
see each other again in some of the other sessions.
Excellent. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And it's good to find people we have not met for a while in those sessions. So
That is true. So Francois, you should. The time is terrible, but you should join us for the virtual beach session we're running in Australia.
I thought, you know, I decided to attend.
Oh,
you know,
excellent.
I like to swim.
Wow.
And there is someone in Europe who decided to do another one just before the final plenary, which is a good
okay.
idea. And
Yes.
I joined that one. It is in the agenda somewhere in the community things.
Okay.
So she decided because 2 o'clock was 2 a.m. was too early.
Yeah.
So I decided I will try to attend the beach party. You know, an Australian beach is something I cannot miss. You know, I like to swim.
Even virtually.
I
Yes.
make no promises about the temperature of the virtual water. I'm sorry.
Yes, but I will not, I am nearly sure I will not drink a cocktail at 2 a.m. This I can promise.
Well,
But,
for me, it's the middle of the day, and I'm trying to decide what I will drink also. So we'll see.
yes, I have to think about my sunglasses. I don't know where they are because the pandemic has not been
Haven't
good
needed
for
them
beaches.
recently.
But so I will try. I'm not sure, but maybe we meet there.
Don't push yourself if you'd rather prioritize
No,
sleep.
but it's you know, the 11th of November is a day off in this country because we celebrate the end of the First World War still.
As do we. We have a minute's silence at 11 o'clock on the 11th of the 11th.
Yes, so in our case, it's a day off. So I have the whole morning to recover from the beach party.
Good.
Excellent. Cool.
All right. Well,
Okay.
I will see you in other sessions, no doubt.
Ciao.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.